The look my wife, Jessica, gave me as I walked through our home office door that Tuesday evening should have been my first warning, but I was too focused on the USB drive in my pocket and the damning evidence it contained to notice the slight tightening around her eyes, the way her fingers hesitated over her laptop keyboard. I'd been loaded for bear, ready for the confrontation that would end 32 years of what I thought was a solid marriage. Now, seeing her sitting there in her navy blazer, blonde hair pulled back in that professional bun she wore to court, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart that had already shattered 3 days ago when I discovered the truth. This was something harder, more fundamental. My faith in the world as I'd understood it. Hey, honey, Jessica said, closing her laptop with practiced casualness. How was your day at the firm? The firm. She still called my law practice that, even after 25 years of building it from a one man operation in a strip mall to one of Denver's most respected corporate law firms. Even after the prestigious move to the glass tower downtown, the partnership expansions, the $1 million cases. To Jessica, it was still just the firm, something that funded her real passion for criminal defense work. Productive, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. Very productive. My name is Robert Mitchell, and at 54, I thought I knew exactly who I was and what my life looked like. I was the senior partner at Mitchell and Associates, specializing in corporate mergers and acquisitions. I had a beautiful wife who was one of Colorado's most successful defense attorneys. Our two kids were thriving adults. Sarah, 28, was finishing her surgical residency at Denver General, and Tom, 26, had just made partner at his consulting firm in Chicago. We lived in Cherry Hills Village, one of Denver's most exclusive neighborhoods, in a custom built colonial that Jessica had designed herself. I drove a BMW 7 Series. She had her Mercedes E Class, and we owned a cabin in Aspen that we visited maybe 6 times a year. By every external measure, we'd achieved the American dream. What I discovered 3 days ago was that dreams, no matter how carefully constructed, can collapse in an instant. The unraveling began with a phone call on a Saturday morning in early October. I was in the kitchen making coffee when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Is this Robert Mitchell? The voice was male, middle aged, nervous. Yes, who's this? My name is David Chen. I'm a private investigator. I think we need to talk. Private investigators didn't call successful lawyers on Saturday mornings unless something was seriously wrong. What about your wife? There are things you need to know. I almost hung up. Jessica and I had our problems. What couple married for 3 decades didn't? But she wasn't the type to warrant a PI's attention. She was methodical, professional, careful about everything she did. The idea that she'd be involved in anything shady seemed absurd. Mr. Mitchell, I understand this is difficult, but I have photographs, video, documentation. Your wife is having an affair with Marcus Stevenson. The name hit me like a physical blow. Marcus Stevenson was the district attorney for Denver County, a political rising star who'd been mentioned as a potential candidate for governor. He was also married to Patricia Stevenson, heir to a real estate fortune and one of Colorado's most prominent philanthropists. More importantly, Marcus Stevenson was currently being investigated by a federal task force for corruption charges involving city development contracts. Jessica was his defense attorney. I need to see you today, I told Chen. We met at a diner in Lakewood, far from anywhere either of us might be recognized. Chen was a thin man in his 40s with careful eyes and the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's darker impulses. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Mrs. Stevenson hired me 6 weeks ago, he said. She suspected her husband was having an affair, but wasn't sure with whom. It didn't take long to figure out. The photographs were damning. Jessica and Marcus entering the Ritz-Carlton downtown, Jessica's hand on Marcus's chest as they stood by his Porsche in a parking garage. The two of them at a restaurant in Boulder, leaning across the table toward each other like lovers. But it was the final photograph that destroyed me. Jessica, in lingerie I'd never seen in what was clearly a hotel room. She was looking directly at the camera with an expression of raw desire I'd never seen on her face in 32 years of marriage. How long? I asked. Based on what I've documented, at least 4 months, probably longer, 4 months, during which time Jessica had been coming home to our bed, kissing me goodnight, discussing our retirement plans, making love to me twice a week with what I thought was genuine affection. There's more, Chen said. I've been monitoring their communications. They're not just having an affair, they're coordinating their legal strategy in ways that could constitute obstruction of justice. She's been feeding him information about the federal investigation that she shouldn't have access to. He slid me a second folder. This one contained printed emails, text messages, and phone call transcripts. The affair was bad enough, but this was criminal conspiracy. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because Mrs. Stevenson is planning to file for divorce and expose the affair publicly. She wants to destroy both of them. But she's also willing to make a deal. If Marcus can be convinced to resign from the DA's office and disappear from politics, she'll keep quiet about the corruption angle. She doesn't want the scandal reflecting on her family's reputation. I studied Chen's face. What does this have to do with me? She thinks you might have more influence over your wife than she has over her husband. A coordinated approach could save everyone a lot of public humiliation. I left that diner with a choice to make. I could confront Jessica immediately, demand an explanation, and try to salvage our marriage through counseling and therapy. Or I could take time to think, to plan, to decide exactly how I wanted to handle the destruction of my life. The old Robert Mitchell, the trusting husband who'd believed in the fundamental goodness of the woman he'd loved for 3 decades, would have chosen confrontation and attempted reconciliation. But that Robert Mitchell had died in a diner in Lakewood, looking at photographs of his wife's betrayal. The new Robert Mitchell chose patience. Over the next 3 days, I maintained perfect normalcy. I went to the office, handled my cases, attended meetings with clients. I came home at my usual time, asked Jessica about her day, listened to her discuss Marcus Stevenson's case with what I now recognized as far too much personal investment. The federal prosecutors are grasping at straws, she said over dinner on Monday night. Marcus has been completely transparent about his development decisions. There's no evidence of quid pro quo. She was lying. According to the documents Chen had provided, Marcus had been taking payments from construction companies in exchange for favorable zoning decisions. Jessica knew about the payments because she'd helped him structure them through shell companies. You think he'll beat the charges? I asked. Absolutely. Marcus is a good man who's been unfairly targeted for political reasons. Marcus, she said his name with a slight softening of her voice that I'd never noticed before. Now that I knew what to look for, the signs of her deception were everywhere. Tuesday morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 5 years. Instead of going to the office, I drove to my downtown bank and met with the branch manager. I requested copies of all financial statements for our joint accounts going back 18 months, as well as detailed records of Jessica's credit card usage. The pattern emerged quickly. Regular charges at the Ritz Carlton, always on days when Jessica had told me she was working late. Expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never been to together, purchases at Victoria's Secret, lingerie that had never appeared in our bedroom. She'd been careful, but not careful enough. The financial trail painted a clear picture of a woman conducting a systematic affair while lying to her husband on a daily basis. From the bank, I drove to a discreet office building in the Denver Tech Center and met with Rebecca Torres, one of Colorado's most ruthless divorce attorneys. Rebecca had a reputation for leaving opposing parties financially and emotionally devastated. If I was going to end this marriage, I wanted to win decisively. Based on what you've shown me, we have several options, Rebecca said after reviewing Chin's evidence. Colorado is a no fault divorce state, but adultery can still impact property division and alimony, especially when there's professional misconduct involved. She leaned back in her chair. Your wife has been using marital assets to fund an affair while potentially committing criminal acts with her lover. That gives us significant leverage. What kind of leverage? The type that could leave her with nothing. But you need to be certain this is the path you want to take. Once we start this process, there's no going back. I thought about Jessica sitting in our kitchens that morning, drinking coffee from the mug I'd bought her for our 20th anniversary, casually asking if I had any lunch plans. The same woman who'd been systematically betraying me for months while looking me in the eye. I'm certain Rebecca Torres was thorough. Over the next 2 weeks, while I maintained the facade of a loving husband, she was building the framework for Jessica's destruction. First, the financial preparation. Our joint assets needed to be protected from any attempt Jessica might make to hide or transfer them once she realized what was coming. Rebecca obtained court orders freezing various accounts and placed liens on properties. All of this was done quietly through procedures that Jessica wouldn't discover until it was too late. Second, the evidence gathering. Chin's photographs and documents were just the beginning. Rebecca hired a team of forensic accountants to trace every dollar Jessica had spent on her affair. She subpoenaed phone records, hotel receipts, and travel expenses. Every lie Jessica had told was being documented with legal precision. Third, the professional angle. Jessica's relationship with Marcus Stevenson wasn't just adultery, it was a violation of legal ethics that could result in her disbarment. Rebecca was preparing complaints to the Colorado State Bar that would destroy Jessica's career, even if she somehow avoided criminal charges. The hardest part was maintaining normalcy at home. Jessica continued her routine as if nothing had changed, which in her mind, nothing had. She was still conducting her affair, still lying to my face, still planning whatever future she imagined with Marcus Stevenson. I might need to travel more over the next few months, she mentioned on a Thursday evening. Marcus's case is getting complicated. Marcus's case. The way she said it made my skin crawl. I wondered if she really believed I was too stupid to see through her deceptions, or if she'd simply become so comfortable with lying that she'd stop trying to make her stories believable. Whatever you need to do, I said. She kissed my cheek before heading upstairs to work on her laptop. I knew she was actually video calling Marcus, discussing both legal strategy and their personal relationship. Chin was monitoring her communications in real time, feeding me transcripts of conversations that revealed the depths of her betrayal. I can't wait to get away for the weekend, she'd told Marcus the night before. Robert is so predictable. He never questions my travel schedule. When this case is over, we need to figure out our long term situation, Marcus had replied. I'm tired of sneaking around. I know, but we have to be careful until the federal investigation concludes. Once you're cleared, we can make our move. Their move. They were planning to leave their spouses and build a life together, funded by Marcus's corruption proceeds and Jessica's divorce settlement from me. The arrogance was breathtaking, but Jessica had made a crucial mistake. She'd assumed I was the same trusting fool I'd been for 32 years. She had no idea I was 10 steps ahead of her, building a legal and financial trap she wouldn't escape from. The trap was set for a Thursday in late October. Jessica had told me she was flying to San Francisco for a deposition, a story I might have believed 6 weeks earlier. In reality, she and Marcus were spending a long weekend at a resort in Scottsdale, Arizona. Chen had photographs of them boarding Marcus's private plane together. I called Jessica's office that Thursday morning. Mitchell and Associates, her assistant answered. This is Robert Mitchell. I'm trying to reach my wife. There's been a family emergency. Oh, Mr. Mitchell, I'm so sorry. Mrs. Mitchell is in San Francisco on the Stevenson case. She's expected back Monday. The assistant had no idea she was lying. Jessica had told her the same story she'd told me, maintaining her deception at every level. I hung up and called Rebecca Torres. It's time. The first strike was financial. While Jessica was enjoying her romantic getaway, Rebecca's team was executing the asset protection plan we'd spent weeks preparing. By Friday morning, Jessica's access to our joint accounts would be frozen. Her credit cards would be canceled. The retainer accounts for her law practice would be secured pending investigation. The second strike was professional. Rebecca filed complaints with the Colorado State Bar alleging that Jessica had engaged in professional misconduct by conducting an inappropriate relationship with a client while potentially participating in criminal activities. The evidence package included Chen's photographs, financial records showing the use of client funds for personal expenses, and communications demonstrating her involvement in Marcus's corruption scheme. The third strike was personal. Rebecca filed divorce papers citing adultery and professional misconduct, demanding I retain 90% of our marital assets due to Jessica's malfeasance. The filing included a request for emergency restraining orders, preventing Jessica from accessing or transferring any jointly held property. But the fourth strike was the masterstroke. Rebecca had prepared a detailed dossier of Jessica's affair and professional misconduct, which was delivered simultaneously to three targets: the Colorado Attorney General's office, the FBI task force investigating Marcus Stevenson, and Patricia Stevenson's attorney. Jessica's weekend in Arizona was about to become a very expensive vacation. Jessica called me at 2:30 p.m. on Friday, her voice tight with panic. Robert, something's wrong with my credit cards. They're all being declined. I was in my office, but I'd prepared for this call. That's strange. Have you called the credit card companies? I tried, but they're saying the accounts are frozen. There's some kind of legal hold. A legal hold? That doesn't make sense. Are you sure you're using the right cards? The confusion in her voice was almost pitiable. For months, she'd been operating under the assumption that she was smarter than me, that her deceptions were foolproof. Now she was discovering that her financial lifeline had been severed, and she had no idea why. I'm going to call our accountant, she said. This must be some kind of mistake. Good idea. I'm sure it'll get sorted out. Our accountant, of course, was already aware of the situation. He'd been instructed to refer any calls from Jessica to Rebecca Torres's office. By the time Jessica figured out what was happening, it would be too late to protect herself. I spent that Friday afternoon in meetings with clients, handling routine business while Jessica's life imploded in Arizona. Around 5 p.m., she called again. Robert, I need you to wire me money immediately. There's been some kind of fraud on our accounts, and I'm stranded here. Stranded where? I thought you were in San Francisco. The pause was long enough to tell me she was calculating how much of the truth she could reveal without exposing her lies. I'm in Phoenix. I had to come here for an emergency deposition related to Marcus's case. Another lie. Even when her world was collapsing, she couldn't stop deceiving me. How much do you need? I asked. 5,000 should be enough to get me through the weekend and cover my flight home. $5,000 to extend a romantic getaway that she'd funded through deception and betrayal. The audacity was stunning. I'll see what I can do, I told her. Let me call the bank and figure out what's going on with our accounts. I had no intention of sending her money. She was on her own now, just as I'd been on my own for the past 4 months while she'd been living a double life. Saturday morning, I played golf with three other attorneys at Cherry Hills Country Club. It was a beautiful autumn day, crisp and clear, with the kind of Colorado sunshine that made you grateful to be alive. I shot an 82, my best round in 2 years. After golf, I had lunch at the club with David Patterson, a federal prosecutor I'd known for 15 years. We discussed various mutual cases and professional matters. Eventually, the conversation turned to the Marcus Stevenson investigation. That's going to be a hell of a case, David said. We've got him dead to rights on the corruption charges, but his defense attorney is sharp. Jessica Mitchell knows her way around federal court. Yes, she does, I agreed. She's very good at what she does. Shame about the ethical complications, though. I kept my expression neutral. What ethical complications? Well, I probably shouldn't be discussing this, but there are rumors about an inappropriate relationship between attorney and client. If that's true, it could compromise the entire defense. David was fishing for information, but he was also confirming that word of Jessica's affair was already circulating in legal circles. By Monday, it would be common knowledge among Denver's legal community. I hope that's just gossip, I said. Jessica takes her professional responsibilities very seriously. David smiled. I'm sure she does. That evening, I sat on the deck of our house, drinking a glass of wine and watching the sunset over the front range. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Jessica and 12 voicemails. I didn't listen to any of them. Tomorrow, she would return home to discover that her life as she'd known it was over. She would find that her access to our house had been changed, her law practice was under investigation, and her professional reputation was in ruins. She would learn that I knew about her affair, about her lies, about her criminal activities. Most importantly, she would discover that the trusting, forgiving husband she'd taken for granted no longer existed. Jessica arrived home Sunday evening in an Uber, which told me everything I needed to know about her financial situation. I watched from the living room window as she struggled with her luggage, trying to use her key on the front door locks I'd had changed that morning. When the key didn't work, she rang the doorbell. I let her ring 3 times before answering. Robert? She was holding her suitcase, looking confused and exhausted. Why doesn't my key work? I stepped aside to let her enter, noting the expensive clothes she was wearing, clothes I'd never seen before, purchased with our joint credit cards for her romantic getaway. We need to talk, I said. The conversation that followed was the most controlled performance of my life. I sat in my leather chair, the one she'd always teased me about as being too formal for a living room, and watched her face as I methodically destroyed her world. I know about Marcus, I began. The blood drained from her face, but she rallied quickly. Jessica was a skilled attorney trained to think under pressure. I don't know what you mean. I pulled out a folder containing some of Chen's photographs and placed it on the coffee table between us. I know about the affair, Jessica. I know about the hotel meetings, the romantic dinners, the weekend getaways. I know you've been lying to me for months. She looked at the photographs with what appeared to be genuine surprise. She'd been so careful about their meetings that she'd never considered the possibility of professional surveillance. This isn't what it looks like, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. It's exactly what it looks like. You've been having an affair with your client, violating your professional ethics, and participating in criminal activities. The financial records show you've spent over $40,000 of our money on this relationship. Now she was beginning to understand the scope of what I knew and what it meant for her future. Robert, I can explain. No, I interrupted. There's nothing to explain. I know everything. What I'm going to tell you is how this is going to proceed. I outlined the situation with clinical precision. The divorce papers had been filed. Her access to our financial accounts was frozen. Complaints had been filed with the state bar. The federal prosecutors were aware of her relationship with Marcus and her involvement in his corruption scheme. You have two choices, I concluded. You can cooperate with this process and try to salvage something from the wreckage, or you can fight it and lose everything. Jessica sat in stunned silence for several minutes. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller, more uncertain than I'd heard it in years. How long have you known? 6 weeks? Why didn't you say anything? Because I wanted to be thorough. I wanted to make sure that when this ended, it really ended. She looked around our living room as if seeing it for the first time, taking inventory of everything she was about to lose. The custom furniture she'd selected, the artwork we'd collected over 3 decades of marriage, the life we'd built together. What about Sarah and Tom? They'll be told the truth that their mother chose to destroy our family for an affair with a corrupt politician. The cruelty of that statement hit home. Jessica began to cry, real tears, not the calculated emotion she'd used to manipulate me for months. Robert, please. We can work through this. Marriages survive affairs. We can go to counseling, rebuild trust. No, I said, we can't. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake. This was a calculated betrayal that lasted for months. You looked me in the eye every day and lied to me. You used our money to fund your relationship with another man. You violated your professional ethics and participated in the criminal activities. There's nothing left to save. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where we'd lived for 15 years. Tomorrow, Jessica would be gone, and I would begin the process of rebuilding my life without her. You can stay in the guest room tonight, I said without turning around. Tomorrow, you'll need to find somewhere else to live. Jessica left Monday morning with 2 suitcases and the Mercedes, which she was allowed to keep until the asset division was finalized. I knew she had nowhere to go. Her parents were dead, her sister lived in Seattle, and her Denver social circle would ostracize her once news of the affair became public. I went to work as usual, but by 10 a.m., my phone was ringing continuously. Word of Jessica's ethical violations had spread through Denver's legal community with the speed that only truly scandalous gossip can achieve. Robert, I'm so sorry to hear about this situation, said Martin Walsh, senior partner at one of Denver's white shoe law firms. If there's anything we can do to help, translation, we want to make sure you know we're on your side in case this affects any business relationships. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate the support. Similar calls came throughout the day. Colleagues, clients, professional acquaintances, everyone wanted to express sympathy and ensure they weren't associated with Jessica's misconduct. The legal profession was a small community, and ethical violations were taken seriously. By Tuesday, the story had reached the local media. The Denver Post ran a front page article titled, DA's Defense Attorney Faces Ethics Charges Amid Affair Allegations. The article detailed Jessica's relationship with Marcus Stevenson and its potential impact on his corruption case. The photograph they used was from our 20th anniversary party, Jessica in a black evening gown, smiling at the camera with confidence and poise. It was painful to see how beautiful and happy she'd looked, knowing now that even then she'd been capable of the deception she would later deploy. Wednesday morning, Patricia Stevenson held a press conference announcing her intention to divorce Marcus and expose his corruption. She was flanked by 2 attorneys and a public relations specialist, presenting herself as the wronged wife determined to seek justice. My husband has betrayed not only his family, but the public trust, she said. His affair with his defense attorney represents a conspiracy to obstruct justice and subvert the legal system. I will cooperate fully with federal prosecutors to ensure that both of them face appropriate consequences. Patricia Stevenson was proving to be a formidable adversary. Unlike me, she'd chosen the public destruction route, using media pressure to maximize damage to both Marcus and Jessica. That afternoon, Jessica called me for the first time since she'd left the house. Robert, we need to talk. This has gotten out of hand. Has it? Patricia Stevenson is trying to destroy us both. She's making false allegations about criminal activities. Are they false, Jessica? The pause told me everything. The situation is complicated. Marcus and I were careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. Stop lying to me. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was tired of her deception. I have recordings of your conversations. I know about the shell companies, the kickback payments, the obstruction of justice. You're going to prison, Jessica. The only question is for how long? Another long pause. What do you want from me? I want you to accept responsibility for what you've done. I want you to cooperate with the divorce proceedings without fighting. I want you to disappear from my life quietly. And if I don't, then I'll make sure your destruction is as public and humiliating as possible. Patricia Stevenson isn't the only one who can play hardball. I hung up before she could respond. The federal prosecutors move faster than anyone expected. On Thursday morning, Marcus Stevenson was arrested at his home on charges of conspiracy, mail fraud, and money laundering. The local news showed him being led away in handcuffs while his neighbors watched from their yards. Jessica was arrested that same afternoon at the downtown hotel where she'd been staying. The charges against her included conspiracy to obstruct justice, professional misconduct, and aiding and abetting in a racketeering enterprise. I watched the coverage from my office, feeling a mix of satisfaction and sadness. This was the woman I'd loved for 32 years, being perp-walked in front of television cameras because she'd chosen greed and lust over integrity and family. Rebecca Torres called that evening with an update on the divorce proceedings. With the criminal charges, we're in an excellent position, she said. Colorado law allows for punitive asset division when one spouse has engaged in criminal misconduct that depletes marital resources. We can realistically expect you to retain 90% of your joint assets: the house, the Aspen cabin, the investment accounts, the retirement funds. Nearly all of it would remain with me. Jessica would leave our marriage with little more than her criminal defense costs. What about her law practice? Finished. The state bar will almost certainly revoke her license, and she's got no money to maintain the practice while fighting criminal charges. Her clients are already fleeing to other attorneys. Jessica's professional reputation, built over 25 years of successful practice, was destroyed. Even if she somehow avoided prison time, she would never practice law again. Friday evening, I received an unexpected visitor. Sarah drove down from her residency in Denver to check on me. At 28, she looked remarkably like her mother had at the same age: the same blonde hair, the same green eyes, the same determined jawline. Dad, I'm so sorry, she said, hugging me in the foyer of the house that now felt too large and too quiet. How much do you know? Everything. It's been all over the news here. Some of the other residents recognize Mom from the TV coverage. We sat in the kitchen and I made coffee while Sarah processed the destruction of her family. I can't believe she would do this, Sarah said. I mean, I knew you and Mom had problems, but this... What problems? Sarah looked surprised. Dad, you've been growing apart for years. Mom was always focused on her career, always putting work ahead of family. You stopped talking about anything meaningful. When was the last time you two took a vacation together? Just the two of you. I thought about it. It had been more than 3 years. I guess I didn't realize it was that obvious. It was to us kids. Tom and I used to talk about whether you were going to get divorced, but we never imagined mom would. This is so much worse than just growing apart. Sarah was right. A amicable divorce due to irreconcilable differences would have been sad but understandable. What Jessica had done was unforgivable. Are you going to be okay? Sarah asked. I think so. It's going to take time, but I think I'm going to be fine. And mom, I looked at my daughter, so young and idealistic despite her medical training, still believing that people could be redeemed from their worst choices. Your mother made her decisions. Now she has to live with the consequences. Marcus Stevenson's trial began in January. He'd hired the most expensive criminal defense attorney in Colorado, but without Jessica's help, his case was hopeless. The federal prosecutors had overwhelming evidence of his corruption scheme, and Patricia Stevenson's cooperation had provided them with insider details about his criminal activities. Jessica, meanwhile, was preparing for her own trial while dealing with the collapse of every aspect of her life. She'd been disbarred, evicted from her downtown hotel, and was living in a modest apartment in a suburb of Denver. The photographs in the newspaper showed a woman who'd aged a decade in 6 months. I felt no sympathy for her. Every morning, I woke up in our house, now my house, and remembered what she'd done to our family. Every meal I ate alone was a reminder of her betrayal. Every evening I spent in my study was filled with memories of her lies. In February, Marcus was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. His wife received a settlement that left him with nothing, and his political career was obviously over forever. Jessica's trial was scheduled for April. Rebecca Torres estimated she would receive between 5 and 8 years in prison, depending on her level of cooperation with prosecutors. She could potentially reduce her sentence by testifying against other participants in the corruption scheme, Rebecca explained. But that would require admitting to crimes she's still denying. Jessica's pride was going to cost her additional years in prison. Even facing total destruction, she couldn't bring herself to accept full responsibility for her actions. In March, I received a letter from Jessica's new attorney requesting a meeting to discuss a potential plea agreement. The letter suggested that Jessica might be willing to cooperate fully with the divorce proceedings in exchange for my support during her criminal sentencing. I threw the letter away without responding. Spring came early to Colorado that year. By late March, the aspen trees around our cabin were beginning to bud, and the wildflowers in the meadows were starting to bloom. I'd taken to spending weekends at the cabin, enjoying the solitude and the mountain air. It was during one of these weekends that I received a call from Tom, my son in Chicago. Dad, I wanted to give you a heads up. Mom tried to call me yesterday. What did she want? She wanted me to talk to you about helping with her legal situation. She seems to think that if the family shows support, it might help her at sentencing. What did you tell her? I told her that what she did was unforgivable and that she made her own choices. I also told her that I support whatever decision you make about helping her or not. Tom had always been more emotionally direct than his sister. As a child, he'd been the one to call out unfairness or hypocrisy when he saw it. Now, at 26, he had no patience for his mother's attempts to manipulate her way out of the consequences of her actions. Thank you, I said. That means more to me than you know. Dad, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy? I mean, obviously, this whole situation has been horrible, but are you better off now than you were before you found out about the affair? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the logistics of divorce and the satisfaction of Jessica's legal troubles that I hadn't really considered my own emotional state. I think I am, I said slowly. I mean, I'm angry and hurt and disappointed, but I'm also relieved, I guess. I don't have to pretend anymore that our marriage was something it wasn't. Good. Because Tom and I were worried you might be one of those guys who tries to get back together with his ex wife out of loneliness or nostalgia. Not a chance. Also good. You deserve better than what she gave you. After I hung up, I sat on the cabin's deck and thought about Tom's question. Was I happy? The answer, surprisingly, was yes. For the first time in years, I felt like I was living my own life rather than maintaining a facade. I didn't have to wonder where Jessica was or what she was really doing. I didn't have to make conversation with a woman who'd become a stranger. I didn't have to pretend that our marriage was fulfilling when it had become a hollow routine. I was 54 years old. If I lived to be 80, I had 26 years left to build a life that was authentic and meaningful. That seemed like a pretty good deal. Jessica's trial began on a rainy Monday in April. I didn't attend, but Rebecca Torres provided me with daily updates on the proceedings. She's not doing well, Rebecca reported after the first day. The prosecutors have overwhelming evidence, and her attorney is basically arguing for leniency rather than innocence. Is she going to testify? Looks like it, against her lawyer's advice, apparently. Jessica took the stand on Wednesday. According to Rebecca, she tried to minimize her role in Marcus's corruption scheme while accepting responsibility for the affair. It was a calculated performance designed to generate sympathy, but the federal prosecutors dismantled her story during cross examination. They showed that she knew about the kickbacks from the beginning, Rebecca told me. They also proved that she helped structure the shell companies used to hide the money. Her claims about being manipulated by Marcus fell apart under scrutiny. By Friday, the case was going to the jury. Rebecca estimated that deliberation would take less than a day. She was right. The jury returned a guilty verdict in 4 hours on all conspiracy and obstruction charges. Jessica's sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. I spent that weekend at the cabin again, hiking in the mountains and thinking about closure. In some ways, Jessica's conviction was anticlimactic. The real end of our marriage had come 6 months earlier when I'd first seen Chin's photographs. Everything since then had been a legal formality, but there was satisfaction in knowing that justice had been served. Jessica had made choices that destroyed multiple families and corrupted the legal systems she'd sworn to uphold. She deserved to face consequences for those choices. More importantly, her conviction meant that I could finally move forward with my life without looking over my shoulder. Jessica was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison in late May. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing, but Rebecca Torres was there to provide moral support and ensure that our divorce decree was properly processed. She tried to make a statement about rehabilitation and taking responsibility, Rebecca told me afterward, but the judge wasn't impressed. She got the maximum sentence within the guidelines, 7 years. Jessica would be 62 when she was released, assuming she served her full term. Her career was over, her reputation destroyed, her financial resources exhausted. She would leave prison as a convicted felon with no prospect of returning to professional life. The sentence felt appropriate. Jessica had spent 4 months systematically betraying our marriage and participating in criminal activities. 7 years seemed like reasonable compensation for the destruction she'd caused. That evening, I called both of my children to give them the news. Sarah was characteristically emotional. I still can't believe this is really happening, she said. Part of me keeps expecting to wake up and find out this has all been a nightmare. It's been a nightmare, I agreed, but it's ending now. Tom was more pragmatic. Is she going to appeal? Rebecca doesn't think so. The evidence was overwhelming and appeals are expensive. Jessica doesn't have the money for a lengthy legal fight. So it's really over. It's really over. After I hung up, I sat in my study and looked at the empty spaces where Jessica's belongings had been, her diplomas, her law books, her personal photographs. All of it was gone now, either sold to pay for her defense or packed away in storage. The house felt different without her presence, quieter, but also more peaceful. I could make decisions about meals, television, weekend plans without having to consider someone else's preferences or lies about where they needed to be. For the first time in months, I felt truly relaxed. Summer passed quietly. I threw myself into work, taking on new clients and expanding the practice. Without the emotional drain of a failing marriage, I found I had more energy and focus than I'd experienced in years. I also began traveling, something Jessica had never enjoyed. I spent a week in Scotland playing golf, another week in Italy touring vineyards, and a long weekend in New York visiting museums and seeing Broadway shows. The freedom was intoxicating. For 32 years, my personal choices had been constrained by marriage, where to live, how to spend money, how to use vacation time, even what to have for dinner. Now I could make decisions based solely on my own preferences and interests. In August, I received a letter from Jessica. It had been forwarded through Rebecca Torres, who'd screened it for any inappropriate content before passing it along. The letter was 3 pages of handwritten apology and regret. Jessica claimed to have found religion in prison, to have realized the error of her ways, and to be committed to making amends for her actions. She asked for my forgiveness and wondered if we might be able to communicate occasionally. I read the letter twice, then threw it in the trash without responding. Jessica had had numerous opportunities to show remorse and accept responsibility for her actions. She'd chosen to lie and manipulate right up until her conviction. Her jailhouse conversion was too little, too late. In September, Patricia Stevenson called me. She'd gotten my number from Rebecca Torres and wanted to meet for lunch. I thought it might be helpful for us to talk, she said when we met at an upscale restaurant in Cherry Creek. We've both been through similar experiences. Patricia was an elegant woman in her early 50s with silver hair and the kind of composed demeanor that came from old money and social confidence. She'd handled her husband's betrayal with far more public grace than I'd managed. "How are you doing?" she asked. "Better than I expected," I said honestly. "You?" "The same. I thought I'd be more devastated by the end of my marriage, but mostly I feel relieved. Marcus and I had been growing apart for years. The affair was just the final straw. We talked for 2 hours about our experiences with betrayal, divorce, and rebuilding our lives. Patricia had used her settlement money to establish a foundation focused on political ethics reform. She was channeling her anger into productive social change. "Have you thought about what you want to do next?" she asked. I'm not sure. "Travel, maybe. I've been thinking about taking a year off and seeing the world." "That sounds wonderful." "You've earned it." As I drove home from lunch, I realized that Patricia was right. I had earned the right to enjoy my life without the burden of Jessica's deception and betrayal. I'd played by the rules, worked hard, and tried to be a good husband and father. Now I could reap the rewards of those choices. By October, exactly 1 year after David Chen had first called me with evidence of Jessica's affair, I was ready to make some major changes in my life. I promoted my senior associate to managing partner of the firm, retaining ownership but stepping back from day to day operations. I put the Cherry Hills house on the market and began planning an extended trip through Europe. The house sold quickly for full asking price. I kept the Aspen cabin and bought a smaller place in downtown Denver for when I was in town, but I was ready to be free of the suburban palace Jessica had designed. On Halloween night, I was packing books in my study when I found a photograph that had fallen behind my desk. It was from our 25th anniversary party. showing Jessica and me dancing, both of us smiling and looking genuinely happy. For a moment, I felt a pang of loss for what we'd once had. Then I remembered that even at our 25th anniversary, Jessica had probably already been planning her affair with Marcus. The happiness in the photograph was an illusion, a performance she'd been staging for my benefit while consummating her betrayal. I threw the photograph away and continued packing. 2 weeks later, I flew to London to begin a 3 month European tour. From London, I would go to Paris, then Rome, then wherever I felt like going. For the first time since I was 22 years old, I had no responsibilities to anyone but myself. The plane took off on a crisp November evening, climbing into the sky above the Rocky Mountains. As Denver fell away below me, I thought about Jessica in her federal prison cell, probably lying on a narrow bunk and regretting the choices that had brought her there. I felt no sympathy for her situation and no nostalgia for our failed marriage. Jessica had made her bed through a series of calculated betrayals. Now she could lie in it for the next 6 years. As for me, I was finally free to build the life I wanted rather than the life I thought I was supposed to want. At 55, I was healthy, financially secure, and unburdened by the dead weight of a relationship built on lies. The future looked bright. I'm writing this from a villa in Tuscany, 18 months after Jessica's sentencing. The morning sun is streaming through the windows of what has become my temporary office, illuminating vineyards that stretch to the horizon. Last month, I received divorce papers to sign, finalizing our marriage's dissolution. Jessica's signature was notarized by the warden of the Federal Correctional Institution, where she's serving her sentence. There was something poetic about that. Our marriage ending with her signature authenticated by a prison official. The asset division was exactly what Rebecca Torres had predicted. I retained 90% of our marital property, including both houses, the investment accounts, and the retirement funds. Jessica's portion was barely enough to cover her remaining legal fees. I heard through mutual friends that Marcus Stevenson was attacked in prison and suffered serious injuries. He was transferred to a medical facility and will likely serve the remainder of his sentence in protective custody. Patricia Stevenson's foundation has become a significant force in Colorado politics, advocating for campaign finance reform and political ethics legislation. My children have both thrived in the aftermath of their parents' divorce. Sarah completed her residency and accepted a position at a prestigious hospital in San Francisco. Tom was promoted to senior consultant at his Chicago firm. Both of them have visited me in Europe, and we've grown closer without the pretense of maintaining a happy family facade. I've made no attempt to contact Jessica, and she stopped trying to contact me. Our lawyers handle any necessary communication about finalizing administrative details of our divorce. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks about the life she threw away for a few months of excitement with a corrupt politician. 7 years in prison seems like a high price to pay for what was essentially a midlife crisis. But Jessica made her choices with full knowledge of the potential consequences. More often, I think about the life I've built since discovering her betrayal. I've traveled to 12 countries, learned to speak conversational Italian, taken cooking classes in France, and hiked portions of the Camino de Santiago. I've read more books, seen more art, and experienced more adventure in the past 18 months than in the previous 5 years of my marriage. Next month, I'm returning to Colorado to officially retire from the practice of law. I'll keep the cabin in Aspen as a base of operations, but I plan to spend much of my time traveling. I've always wanted to see Asia, and there are still portions of Europe I haven't explored. At 56, I feel younger and more optimistic than I have in years. Jessica's betrayal was devastating, but it also freed me from a marriage that had become stagnant and unfulfilling. In destroying our relationship, she inadvertently gave me the opportunity to create a life that's entirely my own. I suppose I should feel some regret about the hardness of my response to her betrayal, the completeness of the destruction I helped orchestrate. But I don't. Jessica was a successful attorney who understood the consequences of her actions. She chose to risk everything for an affair with a criminal, and she lost everything as a result. The sun is getting higher now, and it's time for me to stop writing and start living. There's a small village about 10 kilometers from here that I want to explore, and the market should be in full swing by the time I arrive. This afternoon, I'll have lunch at a cafe overlooking the valley, drink local wine, and plan my next adventure. Tonight, I'll fall asleep in a bed that's entirely mine, in a house where no one lies to me, surrounded by the peace that comes from living an authentic life. Jessica made her choice when she decided our marriage was worth sacrificing for excitement and greed. I made mine when I decided to respond to her betrayal with strategic precision rather than forgiveness. Both of us are living with the consequences of those choices now. The difference is that I'm living with mine in Tuscany while she's living with hers in a federal prison. Justice, it turns out, can be quite satisfying. In the end,